Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Something Something podcast. My name is Eric Kasloff, and with me, as always, is Larry Sands. How's it going, Larry?
Everything is going good, Eric. We were kind of talking before we started to record. I don't know what it is about weather, but do you feel sometimes that your emotional state is based on weather?
Oh, completely. I think there's that whole thing I remember reading about called the Alaska syndrome.
Mm.
How, like, when it's something about there's places in Alaska where it goes a while without being daytime,
Oh,
like
right.
a whole month, people get more depressed.
I think that's during the winter time, right? The
Yeah,
fall.
also,
Yeah.
I personally though, I like the fall and winter more than summer.
I do too. I do too. Uh, and I think there's a reason why they call it the dog days of summer. But man, I tell you, when it's hot and sweaty, it's just like, ugh,
Oh God, yeah, completely not fun.
man.
All right, so this is gonna be a weird segue.
Yeah.
So my uncle is schizophrenic. One of my
Is he
uncles who you haven't met.
really?
Yeah, yeah. So it does run in my family, and we have a guest today
Wow.
who wrote a whole book about that. Let's bring him up.
Yes. Welcome, Dr.
The most
Les.
awkward transition we've ever done in the history of the show.
Well, it's 1% of the population worldwide. So there are massive numbers of people who have relatives who are schizophrenic.
Really?
Three and
Wow.
a half million schizophrenics in this country alone.
You know,
Wow.
Dr. Lesk, you are a psychiatrist, and it kind of is a happy accident maybe, but like obviously it's raining here in Texas where I am, and it's nice and sunny, where Eric is, and then the weather is good where you are.
Mhm.
I mean, how much uh odd question. How much of our emotional state is driven by like the weather?
Well, some people react to the weather, day by day. But the truth is, the sunlight affects us just as it does plants. And May is the highest suicide month. It also happens to be the month with the greatest increase in light per day. So there's a connection there. And as our retinas pick up more light, you would think our moods would be elevated. But for some people, when they get that mood elevation, they become hopeless and they realize that they're really not in control of their thinking and they become actually suicidal. May is the most dangerous month. So there's some connection with light and weather.
Wow.
Wow.
For real. That is
Mm.
absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Um and I so it's great because whenever we have psychologists on and speaking about, more of the creative process, and with you obviously you have a brand new book. um what what is it about schizophrenia that made you want to write a book?
Well, schizophrenia is what I call the big kahuna of mental illnesses. The book is actually about all mental illness. But after I did my psychiatric residency, this was back in the 80s, I was not satisfied with the answers that I heard the attending psychiatrist give patients and their families. They would come in and their son or uncle or daughter had schizophrenia. They'd say, "Well, what is schizophrenia?" And all the doctor would say is, "Well, it's a chemical imbalance. It's genetic. It's connectivity." And this went on to the point where I finally decided who better to come up with something better than myself? I'm kind of a dyed in the wool nerd. So I started broadening my knowledge base and I read things on anthropology, language theory, developmental psychology. And I think what I've come up with is much more satisfying an explanation than anything I had heard. And that's when I started to write about it and realized I had to write a book about this and spread the word as best I can.
That's very, very interesting. And it is worth noting that your new book is called Footprints of Schizophrenia: The Evolutionary Roots of Mental
I
Illness.
love
There it
the
is right
cover.
there. I like that. I like that. I like
Thank you.
that. What was it? What is everything that you have found out that and let me preface this by saying this because I don't think, and maybe you could help me with this, is I don't think people are wrong. It's really, it's kind of like what you said. It's the evolution of knowledge, right? The knowledge base that it seems like has brought you to write your book, correct?
Yeah, the main purpose, and I'm very fanatic about this, so why I wrote the book. I want every psychiatric patient, whether you're bipolar, schizophrenic, major depression, anxiety disorder, to go to your psychiatrist and say, what is the connection between evolution and mental illness? And if they say, I don't know, tell them to read this book because they are missing something.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Wow.
What what is it that, and I realize, like you wrote a book and you put your time and effort into this, but how did you how did you come up with your conclusions that is really driving your book?
Well, my best teachers, and I put this in the forward to my book, the dedication, my best teachers are my patients. And I listen to them and I try to figure out where is this coming from? What explanation do we have? And the best explanation is this: 50,000 years ago, there was no mental illness. 50,000 years ahead, there will be no mental illness. It's entirely due to the evolutionary moment that we're in. And Orthodox psychiatry doesn't want to hear about that. But that's the truth. And that's what we have to start looking at if we're going to bring psychiatry out of the dark ages. They're missing something, and it's got to change. And I'm trying to get people aware of that so that they can broaden the pressure on Orthodox psychiatrists to look at this.
Wow.
Wow. So
That
you're taking like a quote unquote a radical approach to this, some people might say. Now, my question about the book, would you say that this is geared definitely more towards the average person rather than an academic person?
Yeah, I tried specifically to write it for the average person because that's who I want to reach. I want the average person and patient and families to understand this theory, and it is understandable, and demand that their professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, etc., think about this and find out about it because that's the only way it's going to change. And until that happens, our research is off base. Psychiatry is going to remain in the dark ages. And that's what has to happen. It has to come from the patients and their families, pressuring them to find other explanation.
um the evolution of psychiatry, and has it changed at all from when you first started to go through school and the training that you received? How much is changed? Because I think, like with any profession, I would assume maybe being a doctor, things have changed, although not much. I think what I'm trying to say is because of your findings, my question is has not psychiatry changed in a way because of society has changed? I know that may be a crazy question. I'm not sure.
Well, let me answer your question this way. Do you know any other medical profession that, in order to make a diagnosis, they don't have a single lab test, a single x ray, a single CAT scan? The only way a psychiatrist makes a diagnosis is by listening to what the patient says. And patients are not always in the best condition to relate what they're thinking and feeling. And they can get information from families and from previous records, but we're in the dark ages, and we're in the dark ages because we're missing something. A person named Theodorus Dobansky once said, "You cannot understand any biology unless you understand its evolution." And
Mm.
that's what psychiatry completely ignores. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to read about it. They don't want to know anything about it.
Is it because they can't really change things? Because obviously being a doctor and doing all the steps, taking the labs, and they find out what's wrong with you, then they can treat like the symptom if you got a cold or the
Yeah.
flu. But but it seems that, and to what you're saying, I mean, there are no, like tests, like physical tests that
No,
that could be done. Um,
it's very subjective.
yes, yes, because even like, like researching about you and reading about your book and everything that you have like available of your information, and you've got a lot of great information,
A
by
great
the way.
website.
Yes, and
Okay.
it's Stephen Lesk MD .com is your website.
Yeah.
Um, is there are there tests that can be done? Because, and it's kind of like what you said. I mean, when you have a physical ailment, when you feel bad, you can say, "Well, I feel like this." But when you are like mentally impaired, I mean, and it's hard. You really have a job on your hand to try to disseminate what's going on. How do you handle that? And what are some of the processes that you've have you taken those processes obviously to write your book?
Well, as I said, it's very subjective, and we try to use the most objective diagnostic that we can. Eileen, could you turn that off? Thank you. Um, could you turn off the med thing? So,
and,
the
and
beeping med thing.
yeah, that is absolutely one of the things
Uh, sorry
that
about that.
no, that's okay. You're a working professional. Let's just add that. You're in your office right now, right?
Well, study.
Yeah, yeah. So you're a working professional, and there's nothing wrong with that. So yes, go ahead. Continue.
Well, we psychiatry would love to have a blood test, would love to have an x-ray where we can say, due to your x-ray and your blood test, this is what you have. We don't have it. All we have are lists of symptoms, and we try to match those as best we can to the patient. But it's not always that easy. And often there are several diagnoses that fit at the same time. And then we try to pull together, a treatment plan, and our medications are in the dark ages. They have many two side effects. They don't work quickly. We don't know who they're going to work on and who they won't. And patients go off them routinely because they're not effective enough and there are too many side effects.
Yeah, yeah. Um, how long? Oh man, this is a crazy question. How long did it take you to write your book, and what were some of the, not issues, but what were some of the planning out stages of your book? Because I'm sure, I mean, I'm almost very sure that you had a lot of information to go through to write your book.
Like I said, I had to broaden my knowledge base and start absorbing a lot of things about anthropology, developmental psychology, and language. And once I did that, I started to get a view of schizophrenia that was a little different. And
Hmm.
the view is that when schizophrenics act crazy and say crazy things, it's a regression to a previous way of thinking. It's a childlike way of thinking. And how does that happen? Well, I had to figure that out as well. It has a lot to do with dopamine, language, and the suppression of dopamine.
Wow. Now, dopamine is that like the sugar high or the rush, or no? Am I?
Dopamine is a reward chemical. It's like a Pavlovian reward chemical, but
Yeah.
it also does a lot of other things. And what we do is suppress dopamine in the tracks that have to do with movement and motor stuff. But we could never suppress dopamine in other tracks until we got language. Once we got language, we were able to suppress dopamine in these other tracks, and that's what made all the difference. Every single mental illness has to do with the desuppression of dopamine.
Mm.
Every single one. And every medication we have either blocks dopamine or suppresses dopamine. So clearly, dopamine is the key player in this drama. And we have to realize that, and we have to figure out why. And I think I have very clearly in my book.
Wow. Wow. Um, wow.
Wow.
This is all kind of like head blowing
Yeah.
for non um gosh, for people that don't understand, this is a lot to take in, but I think that's the point of why you wrote your book, right? Because
Right.
it I'm like I'm kind of my head. I'm kind of at a loss for words because I'm trying to figure out how this all fits together.
All right. Can you
Uh,
give me 1 second break or shouldn't I?
yeah,
Oh yeah, take all the time you need. Yeah.
sure.
Sorry.
Yes. So future Eric.
Yeah, I'll know to cut this out.
Yeah. This is interesting.
Very much. Yeah.
Very interesting. You know what I'll do is when he comes back, I'll put his book up and then we can kind of get into the makings of it. So you can cut that. Um uh so yeah, I'll bring up the graphic and then we'll start and then you
Okay.
can just cut into that.
All right. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's
Oh,
cool.
that's okay. Okay, so Dr. Lesk, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna bring up the um the book there, and then we're gonna cut into I'll Eric, do you have a question or anything?
No, I'm too into it right now to think.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So it'll cut to that and then so Dr. Lesk, let's talk about
Wait, Larry, give me a countdown so we can come back in.
okay, all right, ready? Let's see.
5, 4.
D- Dr. Lesk, it's absolutely amazing to hear you talk about all this because
Thank you.
when you say footprints of schizophrenia and the evolution of the evolutionary roots of mental illness, but you really talk about going back to the not the well, I guess the Stone Age, right? What is some of that? Um, wh-
Well, 50,000 years ago, that's when language began. But when you think about it, hominins, and those are human like creatures, have been around for millions of years 6, 7 millions of years. So 50,000 is a tiny uh, block
Drop
of
of the bucket.
time
Yeah.
ago.
yeah.
And language totally revolutionized the way we use our minds. So it makes perfect sense that not everyone is on board with this yet. In the same way, I call the mentally ill evolution's dispossessed. They are not quite on board with that kind of neurochemical change required. And 50,000, 20,000 years hence, everyone will be. But right now, we're still in this transitional phase. And once we get through it, that'll be that. But that's why we're seeing mental illness. And it has to do with language and the suppression of dopamine. And that when people develop mental illness, that suppression fails and there's a rush of dopamine. And that's why every chemical we use to treat schizophrenia blocks dopamine. And the chemicals we use to treat major depression, they subdue dopamine indirectly. So
Wow.
it's very clear what has happened. But psychiatry doesn't want to look at it that way.
And why do you think that is?
Well, I think they want to just focus on what they think they know, and what they think has to be the answer. And they don't want some guy telling them, you're missing something.
Right.
But if they can start to change, there's a lot of hope that we can refocus our research, reduce stigma, because now we know what schizophrenia is. It's not an infection. It's not contagious. It's not possession by the devil. It's nothing that they did or their families did. It's an evolutionary glitch, and it's going to stay that way for quite a while. But we can learn more about it and figure out better ways to treat it.
Is
So I'm
is your
hopeful.
Yeah. Oh, I think you have to remain hopeful. And I
Yeah.
think it takes
And I
people.
think with people like you who are, looking at other ways to treat these things, it
Yeah.
really is going to make a huge dent in what's going on because it just takes one person to be the first one to point out the emperor isn't wearing any clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't think I'm the only psychiatrist who feels that way.
Yeah.
I may be
You're
the only one who's
saying it.
writing it publicly and trying to broadcast it, but I think other psychiatrists are seeing that genetics alone is not the answer. We need to look at other things.
Wow. Wow. And to go along with what Eric said, I mean that's a revolutionary, right?
It's
And
different, and
yeah.
it's not something that has been researched yet because it's so new. And so when I
Wow.
write an article or a letter to the American Journal of Psychiatry, and I've written dozens, and I get back a response, well, this is speculation. Yeah, that's how science progresses. Speculation, theory, and some theories go by the wayside and others don't. This one, I think, has such a grain of truth to it that anyone who takes the time and effort to understand it will see the logic in
You do bring up a good point because I think people are they don't really know the process of what professionals have to do in order to bring up new ideas, right? And you just said, you're trying to submit letters to, is it a national board or
it.
of
Like the
psychiatry?
American Journal of Psychiatry, and there are many journals.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not as easy as just sending a letter and going, "Hey, what do you think?" Right? Because how do because I think when people pick up your book, and I think this is what you want is to have not not a self help, but really an educational tool, right?
It's a perspective, and I want them to go to their practitioners and say, what is the link between mental illness and evolution? And if they have no answer, give them the book, read them the book, tell them about it, because they're missing something, and it's holding psychiatry back, and it's holding patients' care back. And we need to break through it already. I think that there's a certain degree of, who is this guy to tell us something? And there's a certain degree of fear. I tried to put an advertisement, a paid advertisement, in the American Journal of Psychiatry's newsletter about my book. They rejected it angrily and saying, "This is speculation. We can't, go
Mm.
along with it." I was willing to pay for it. They wouldn't have it. They would
Wow,
not have
really, really. I,
it.
I think that kind of goes along too. That you know, and it's like people don't want, although people want to talk about change and discovering and all this wealth of information. That but isn't that the idea? It's like what you said. That's the idea of all this is to explore the possibilities that are out there.
Well, that's exactly what evolution is. Evolution progresses with mutations. And some of those mutations are going to make it harder for the person or the animal to survive and procreate, and some are going to make it easier. And
Easier.
those are the ones that will survive, just like science. Some theories are going to make it much easier for us to understand what's going on, and others will not. And those will go by the wayside. But we need speculation, we need speculators, and we need to be an open minded about it to at least say, all right, let's examine this. Let's take a look at it, even if we disagree ultimately.
Even as as people even 50 years ago, I mean, we've really come a long way, right, in evolution, our thoughts and our information, right? And oh man, Dr. Lesk, you have, this is wild to even think about.
Well, just in my lifetime, I mean, I'm in my 70s. When I was a kid, a TV was this round box with
Yeah.
a black and white flickering screen. There were no computers, no cell phones, nothing. I mean, the advances are so rapid
Yeah.
and so amazing. You can think, what was it like 200 years ago compared to now? Totally different, and people haven't quite caught up. Not everyone is on board with it yet. And those people that I call evolution's dispossessed, those are the ones who we call mentally ill because their brains are not working in this new way to suppress dopamine that went along with language and is very recent in evolutionary terms.
Hmm. So let's
Wow.
get into the nitty gritty of the book. What exactly would someone find in it? Is it just essays? Is it different cases where you've tried out these new methods, or what exactly?
Well, they're going to see a step by step explanation of exactly what I mean when I say that mental illness is evolution's dispossessed. And it goes back to, like I said, the onset of language 50,000 years ago, which caused a suppression of dopamine in tracks where we could never suppress it before, and that every mental illness reverses that. Every mental illness is due to the desuppression of dopamine. And if we can see that, it becomes very clear how this evolutionary change progressed and put us where we are today. And how you can see at maybe 20,000 years from now, we're not going to be in that position. We're still in this transition, and people are getting it, but some aren't. It's like if someone suddenly said, everyone has to learn to play chess. Well, some people are going to be great at it. Some people are going to limp along and do okay. And some people just aren't going to get it. And
Right.
that's kind of where we're at this point in terms of our brains due to language and how that changed our relationship with dopamine. And by the way, it's not just mental illness. Parkinson's is related to dopamine.
Really?
Alzheimer's is related to dopamine. Tourette's, stuttering, restless legs, all of these things are related to dopamine and also the evolutionary change that we're in now. So we have to acknowledge that, then we can really start moving forward in our research efforts.
Wow.
Wow.
So that, I mean, that changes a lot because now you're talking, like, and and maybe this is like a bad, maybe not a bad thing, maybe I'm not doing justice because not everybody, okay, let me ask you this. Does everybody know what schizophrenia is that doesn't have a family member or a friend? Do they understand what schizophrenia is?
Absolutely not. It's under the radar. Even though 1% of the population worldwide, which is very unusual, you're not going to find that in a genetic illness like Tay
No.
Sachs or sickle cell, which hovers in certain ethnic communities. This is worldwide. It's massive numbers, but yet it's under the radar. You don't read about it, you don't hear about it. And then people make up their own crazy ideas that schizophrenics are dangerous and murderers. They're very passive people. They're just trying to cope in a complex society with a thought process that's a little more primitive. It's a thought process that we had prior to language and that children still have and work their way out of as they learn language.
Wow.
Hmm.
Wow. And I think it is worth noting that when you start talking about, Alzheimer's, I think is and Alzheimer's is probably more prevalent, or people talk about it more than schizophrenia, right?
Yeah, it's a huge issue because of the aging of the population.
Right.
More and more people are getting it,
Yeah.
and we have nothing really good in terms of a treatment yet.
My goodness. Why don't people talk about schizophrenia more?
They're afraid of it. They're embarrassed by it. It's. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to know anyone who's schizophrenic. It's contagious. They come up with all kinds of crazy ideas about it, but we need to bring it into the mainstream. That's another reason I wrote the book. Schizophrenics are great people. They're wonderful. They think differently than we do, but these people have a lot to offer us. And if we can understand them in a way that doesn't frighten us, they can come into the mainstream and be accepted, and we can have much more focus on it. But
Yeah.
it's hush hush. It's kept under the woodwork, and it's
Yeah.
very sad.
It's
It
very
really
sad.
is when you think about it like that. It's like you said, people see movies with schizophrenic people and they're always the, crazy psychos and stuff like that. But it's normally just the person trying, suffering to get by day, like everyone else. Like you said, they just have this one thing that's keeping them from being like everyone else, and it's
Mhm.
quite sad when you see it all like that.
Yeah, I mean, schizophrenics don't think the way we do. Children don't think the way we do. People who use psychedelics, they don't think the way we do. We don't think the way we do when we're asleep. So
Mm.
it's not uncommon to have these differing ways of thinking. But for the mature adult, we think in a realistic way most of the time. So when you hear someone talking in a way that's different, you become frightened of them. You think, what are they doing? Or what can they do to me? But we can understand it as a regression to the type of thinking we had prior to language 50,000 years ago, which is exactly what it is.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow. How long did it take you to write your book?
A couple of years,
Yeah. Yeah.
couple of
Yeah.
years, and then it took even longer to get it published. It's a huge battle.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
which is tougher, writing a book or getting it published. But I
Hmm.
was
Right.
very
Right.
lucky, and I kept pushing. And I'm
Wow.
working on a second book now. I'm trying to get published.
Wow. And is it so hard because of the controversial issues of schizophrenia?
Well, publishing is a business like any other, and if they don't think it's going to sell, they're not interested. That's the bottom line, and you have to convince them why it could sell and what you're going to do to promote it, and then they might get interested. And it so happens that Prometheus has published psychological works for a long time. They've done a great job with it, so they're particularly interested, and they picked it up. But
Wow.
it's a business, and it's a bottom line issue like any other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, is there anything else that you would like, because I don't even know, and this is part of the part of the, not the issue, but part of the deal is, I think when people have the opportunity to ask questions of a medical professional, right? A psychiatrist, a doctor, they only know based on what's happening in their life, in my life, for example, right? And I don't know, Eric, is there anything that you want to ask? um because I didn't even know about your other uncle.
Yeah, it runs in my family. A few of my relatives have been schizophrenic. I've never seen the full ugly side of it. I've only seen the suffering side. I mean, there are times when schizophrenics do have those, periods where it's best to maybe not be around them, depending on what they're going through. I've never seen that side of it. I've only seen the sad suffering side, is how I'll put it.
Hmm.
Well, your functionality and your ability to reproduce do go down with the diagnosis. On the other hand, there are some high functioning schizophrenics. And one of those movies, A Beautiful Mind,
John, that was
got,
John Nash was the
won a
first that
Nobel
popped in my
Prize.
head.
Ellen Sachs wrote a book, The Center Cannot Hold. She's a lawyer. There are doctors. Weijin Wang wrote a book, The Collected Schizophrenias. She has a master's degree in writing. Bethany Yeiser, Mind is Strange. So there's a high functioning group of schizophrenics, but for most people, they have to use a type of thinking that is oops, more primitive than most. And that's very tough to get through society that way. And they basically want to be left alone. And we try to help them as best we can, but there's too much stigma, too much misunderstanding, and too much avoidance. Just, stay away. But these are wonderful people. I've worked with them for 40 years, and they never cease to fascinate me and say things that are interesting and that can reveal where they're at. For
Yeah.
example, I asked a patient, sometimes I like to just throw out a question to see what kind of response I get. I said, "Why does the sun come up in the morning?" So they thought about it and thought about it, and they said, "Tomorrow." So I scratched my head and I said, "Well, could you elaborate on that a little bit?" He said, "Didn't you ever see Annie?
That's
The sun will
funny.
come up tomorrow."
I like that.
Well,
Wow.
this is how they think it. They're very kind of eccentric, and it's only the meaning that has meaning to them is what they will come up with. They're not thinking necessarily on a reality track, but if it has meaning to them, that's what's important to them. And
Yeah.
it's fascinating. I think a lot of artists have been schizophrenic, writers, playwrights, because they have a window to something that we don't have. We have to gate all of that out in order
Mm,
for us to function on an adult level. But
yeah.
they don't. And they have a window to something that's beautiful and fascinating.
Wow.
Wow.
That's really, this is a lot. You know,
Yeah.
normally we talk to authors, we talk to filmmakers, and once in a while we get to talk to psychologists and professionals that that obviously, when we deal with creatives like what you said, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes on
Yeah.
in in our heads because of the circumstances of looking for jobs and waiting for people, and that little voice in our head. And maybe this is a question, is just because, and I'm referring now to creative people, but maybe even, dare I say, the normal non-creatives, and this would probably be a great question for you, is just because and this is a crazy question, but just because we hear voices in our head, right? You have the good voice, the bad voice. Does that make us crazy?
Well,
Create.
if you're hearing a voice that comes from outside your head talking to you, then you better get that checked out. Sometimes people will hallucinate. That doesn't mean they're crazy. There's something called the Charles Bonnet syndrome, where as people age and they lose their sight and their hearing, they can start to hallucinate. But if you're hearing voices outside your head, that's something you better check out. Now, all of us have altered thinking when we're asleep, and we have altered thinking when we take ayahuasca, and we have altered thinking as children. So we're all capable of it. But the schizophrenic is stuck in it because of this chemical
Wow.
desuppression of dopamine. They're trapped in that. And that's different. So you
Wow.
want to get that checked out. Most people are diagnosed schizophrenic between the ages of 18 and 25. So if you're older than 25, you're pretty much in the clear.
Really?
Wow.
Is
Now,
is that
if
having to do with the dopamine and the production of it?
Yeah, I think it has to do with the fact that, as you learn language, you're kind of protected. But once you've mastered language, if you have this susceptibility to schizophrenia, that's going to happen around 15, 20, end of high school, start of college. That's when the dopamine desuppresses in a huge rush, and then it stays that way, and you've got it for life, and you have to be on medication.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
For a person that doesn't know a whole lot, and meaning me,
Same.
about dopamine and the way our body reacts. I mean, it's wild. It's absolutely wild to be able to talk to you and talk about this is an issue. And then when professionals don't look at this type of thought process that you're bringing to the table, my goodness, my goodness, my
Well,
goodness.
it's sad that my profession is so stuck that they can't start thinking of different ways to explain things, and it's impeding us in our research. I review research papers for a continuing medical education company, and it's sad sometimes when they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and it's just not going because
Yeah.
they're leaving something out, and it's called evolution. And all you have to do is look at it and put two and two together. And if they read my book, it's all there. It's
Yeah,
explained. And it's like buying a car. You got to kick the tires, you got to drive it around a little. And I think you'll be very comfortable with it, as I am.
yeah,
And that's why I'm doing this. I'm trying to get the word out
yeah.
and get people to think about it. And I want every psychiatric patient to take this book into their provider and say, what is the connection between evolution and mental illness? And if they say, I don't know, give them the book or tell
Right,
them about the book
right,
or tell them,
right.
look into this
Yeah,
because it's got to change. We could be doing much better. Our medications just the best medication we have for schizophrenia, which is called clozapine, has so many side effects. It causes seizures, it causes weight gain, it causes drooling. You become fat on it. You can have all kinds of reactions. You need a blood test every single week, but yet it's still the best thing we've got. We've
Jeez.
got to do better, and we can do better, but we're missing something. And until we figure that out in psychiatry, we're going to flounder, and it's I don't want to see that. That's why
yeah.
I'm doing this.
Unbelievable, unbelievable. I'm gonna bring up that your book,
Yeah.
Footprints of Schizophrenia, is now available on Amazon.com. There you go. I like
Yeah.
it. I
I
like
love
it.
the
I
cover.
like it.
Thank you.
Yes. What?
Well, it illustrates kind of the change. This would be the adult kind of organized thinking, then this would be a step back from that, and then the schizophrenic thinking, which is very disorganized and primitive.
Yeah.
So in graphic form, it's very nicely expressed there. What I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And your book is available, by the way, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Bookshop. All of these
yeah.
are .coms. Look it
Very
up.
easy to get it.
Yeah, yeah,
And again, links will be in the description where you can purchase it. More than likely, just the Amazon link.
yeah.
That's where every single person buys their books from. And
Yes,
Yeah.
I know I'll
yes.
definitely be looking into the book. It sounds fascinating and like an
Yes.
easy read. If someone like me could get it, anyone could get it.
Yeah.
Well, I tried to make it accessible to everybody. Einstein said, if you can't explain your theory to a 6 year old, you don't understand it well enough. And I
Hmm.
agree with him. It has to be understandable for everyone to get it. Otherwise, you're really not clear enough about it in your
Yeah.
own mind.
This is one of those subjects, and really this particular episode is one of those episodes where we talk a lot about a little bit about a lot, and it seems to me that you have so much unfinished business with
Yeah.
with your with with your book, but also the things that you seem to absolutely be 100% confident in. And I just, man, I tell you, I hope and pray that that you get some type of something where you're just taken not seriously, but looked at in a way where this is so important. It's such an important topic, and I think
Yeah.
that's the thing that I'm having an issue, not an issue with, but trying to find the correct things to say. I don't know if there are correct things to say when you talk about
Well,
schizophrenia.
being on shows like this is a help, and it's
Yeah.
doing this. I'm trying to do as much of this as I can to get the word out, and somehow it's going to take off. There's going to be a spark, and things will change. I'm hopeful for that, and I'm writing another book, which is about entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, and how
Oh,
that affects mental illness and physical illness. Another under realized force of nature. So I'm trying to write things about important issues that are under recognized, but this is the most important to me. I've been a psychiatrist for 40 years, never satisfied with the treatments we have, the diagnostics we have, and the explanations. And I'm
Mhm.
trying to do something about it. And I think with help from people like you guys, I will get somewhere.
I have a question before we wrap up, because Eric, I know this is probably the question. Do you feel compelled to talk about schizophrenia and mental health in this way? Is there something compelling you to talk so
good question.
passionately about this?
Well, when you feel you've been working with people for 40 years and you feel you have an explanation that's better and more complete and successful than anyone else, you want people to hear about it. Even if they disagree with it, just hear about it, think it over, and consider it. Why not? What does it have? What do you have to lose? Because I think it can make a huge difference and change a lot of people's lives, not just the patients, but the families and the people who treat them. So it's so important. What can I say? I've dedicated my whole life to this, and I'm going to keep going.
Wow. Wow. Dr.
Well,
Les.
and I think that's the best way to end part one
Yeah.
of this because I do honestly feel we're going to have you back on to discuss this in a more in depth level.
Yes.
Again, Dr. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this with us.
Thank
Again,
you.
Footprints of Schizophrenia, it can be purchased everywhere. Links to where you can purchase it will be in the description if you're listening in over on Anchor. And when this episode goes up, we will make sure to put links in all of our social medias. Thank you again, Doctor. And
Thank
everybody,
you.
like we say each and every week, remember, support our troops.